Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I show you how I overwinter my dahlia tubers. So let's go. It is the third week of October and well, we had a frost and the frost hit my dahlia tubers and it's been a few days and I figured it's a great time for me to go ahead and start removing them out of their containers and pots and start the process of overwintering the tubers. I made a video last year showing you my process for how I overwinter the tubers. I'll put a link to that down in the description below. In that video, I showed the process for digging out the tubers out of the ground. The big thing is when you dig the tubers, you want to make sure you don't poke or pierce them. You don't want to ruin them. So it's good to use something like a pitchfork and dig away from the base of the plant. And then just be a little careful when you're digging with your pitchfork. The dahlias that I have in the pots over here were grown from seed a number of years ago. It's very easy to grow dahlias from seed. So if you have dahlia plants already in your yard and you're interested in that process, I also made a video showing how to collect the seeds from dahlias. But when you grow a dahlia from seed, that dahlia plant will produce tubers. And that's what I have here are a whole bunch of plants that now have tubers that have grown over the years. I've divided the tubers and I end up with more plants. Normally, you don't want to pull out your tubers out of the ground or out of a pot until a frost has hit them. And then you want to wait a few days or a few weeks after that. They will be fine in the ground or in the pots. I have quite a few that I have to tend to, not only all of these here, but up along my walkway as well. So it's going to take me a number of days to do this process. But I figured what better time than today to at least empty out a couple of pots. So let's go ahead and we're going to take one pot and I'm going to show you what's next. I did want to mention, I live in New Hampshire Zone 5B. Dahlias are not hardy here where I live. They might be hardy in certain areas of Zone 5B if you really heavily mulch them. I don't want to experiment with it because I feel like it's just not worth it. But where you live, you might be in Zone 5B or even 6A and you've had luck overwintering your dahlia tubers in the ground. And if you have, please drop a comment down in the comment section below because I want to know how you got that to work, how you got it to overwinter. But for me, it's really easy to overwinter them in my garage. So that's what I'll be doing again this year. I'm going to use hand pruners and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut the top part of the plant off. I'm going to leave a little bit at the base though. It makes it easier to be able to pick up and hold the tubers and move them around. There are so many different ways to overwinter your dahlia tubers. And if you do a search on YouTube or just on the internet, you're going to find a lot of different ways to do it. Some people like to divide their tubers down to single tubers in the fall time. Other people like to divide their tubers in the springtime. I prefer to divide them in the spring. I like to see the eyes. It's very easy to see them in the springtime when the plants are basically waking up. All of this material can be cut down into smaller pieces and I can then add it to my compost pile because it hasn't been diseased. It was perfectly fine. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and dump out the contents of this pot so that I can show you a close-up of what's next after that. I just have a small metal hand rake and I'm going to use that to take apart some of the soil from around the tuber. I can just keep loosening the soil either with my hands or with my tool, as long as I'm careful. I really like this type of dahlia because it doesn't require any staking. It stays nice and short. It's very compact. It does great either in the landscape or in a pot. I'm being very gentle here. I don't want to ruin my tubers, but I am trying to get some of the dirt off. And with this top part right here, if I wanted to, I could even cut it a little bit more. I want to have enough there that I can hold this, but I don't need this much growth on the top. At this point, there are a few things you can do. You could rinse all of your dahlia tubers off with water. Some people like to do it, some people don't. I've done it both ways. Both ways have worked for me. I will say though, you want to be really careful. When you are washing off your dahlia tubers, you want to make sure that you also then let them dry quite a bit before you store them. Otherwise they will rot. So there's that fine line of having them clean, but then also having them too wet. The soil, if you leave the soil on your dahlia tubers, it's not going to hurt the tubers. In fact, it's going to hold in some of the moisture during the winter months. So, like I said, I've done it both ways. And for this year, I'm choosing not to remove the soil with water. However, after a few weeks of letting these dry, after about a week of letting these dry, I will then store them. And when I store them at that time, I can remove some of the soil. I can use something like a small brush or anything, similar to a brush, and get through the tubers and just clean them up a little bit. One of the reasons I like to do that is because in the spring, when it's time to divide this, it'll be a lot easier to work with the tubers to see the eyes showing. And if I leave too much of the soil caked onto here, the soil gets pretty hard, and then it's really hard to maybe see the eyes as easily. So that's what I'm planning to do. Now, I do have some tubers that I dug out about a week ago, so they're ready for storage. I'm going to get those, and I'm going to show you what the next steps are with those. I have 4 trays of dahlia tubers, just like this one, that came out of pots. And the pots were smaller pots. They were basically dahlia tubers that I had during the late winter months that were in my garage, and they were pre-sprouting. They were in small pots. I never got them out in the landscape. I never got them in the ground. It's okay. I was watering them. I took care of them, and I pulled them out of their pots before frost hit. I've done that before, and they've been fine. And I want to stress that point a little bit, that you're going to read and hear a lot of different things, and you want to do what works for you. I wasn't going to wait for a frost to hit these. I got them out of their pots a few days before the frost hit them. I feel pretty confident that they're going to be fine. But if you want to wait until a frost hits your dahlia tubers, by all means do that. One of the big reasons we're waiting for a frost to hit the dahlia tubers is it basically sends a signal to the tuber telling it now is your time to go dormant. Another reason is you want to make sure that your tubers have stored enough energy. And well, I feel confident these stored enough energy. And they are going to go dormant because they're not in the soil anymore. So let me take you in for a closer look, and I'm going to show you my process for cleaning them up before I store them for the winter. So let's take this large one right here, and I'm just using something like a bottle brush, and I'm just going to take off some of the soil. This step is optional. You don't have to do it. You can if you want to. I'm just showing you what I like to do and what's worked for me. And I'm just being careful. I want to make sure that I'm not opening up anything on my tubers because I want them to be dry. I don't want to wound the tubers and open up anything. And if by mistake I did wound it, meaning scratched it open, I would have to let these tubers dry a little bit more before I stored them. And I'm not trying to do a perfect job here. I'm just trying to clean it up a tiny bit before I store them. And it might happen that a tuber gets loose and falls off, and that's okay. That does happen sometimes. So you can see close up, there are quite a few tubers in here. And at this point, if I wanted to, I could come in and I could snip these off. I do want to mention I had already pruned off quite a few of the roots when I pulled these out of their pots. But let's say I hadn't done that. What I would do at this point now is go ahead and trim off any of the roots because they're not necessary at this point. And now let's go ahead and I'm going to show you my process for storing these. I have a cardboard box here and I have peat moss in the bottom. What I would want to do is pre-moisten the peat moss. I don't want it sopping wet, but I also don't want it bone dry. And I could take the peat moss, basically put it in some sort of a container, bowl, whatever, mix a little bit of water with it. And the whole purpose is so that the tubers don't fully dry out. We want to give them a good start, but honestly, at this point, those tubers have plenty of moisture in them to start off their overwintering process. So you're just adding a tiny bit of water into the peat moss. So I want to show you, I haven't added any water, and notice, look at all the dust. It's very dry right now. I'm doing this outside. You want to be really careful because you don't want to inhale that. And also, I want to mention that I'm using peat moss. You might use potting mix. You might use nothing. There are so many different ways to do this. I'm just showing that I like to use peat moss, and that's what's worked for me. I've heard of people using wood shavings and animal bedding. Lots of different options out there. So I'm just going to add a small amount of water right into here. Like I said, normally though, I would be mixing this in some sort of a bowl or in a some sort of a container, but it's okay to do what I'm doing also. You can add it directly to your box. And again, we're trying to just get it a little bit wet. We don't want it sopping wet. And notice when I do this, it's holding its form. It's just enough water. When I squeeze it, water is not dripping out. I'm not going to label my tuber, but let's say you do care about the color of your tuber. You can go ahead and you can label it. You can take a marker and you could put the name right on your tuber. If you had left more of a stem, you could put something on the stem that tells the name and the color of your tuber. It's really up to you. And then you want to take your tuber and just place it in your box, just like this. And I will be adding more tubers. I'll add another one here, maybe one over here, and maybe one or two over here. I want to make sure that my tubers are not touching each other, because let's say there was rot on this one, even if it's not right now, but later in the season, I want to make sure that the rot doesn't spread from this tuber to any of the other tubers. And then what I'll do after I put my first layer of tubers here is I'm going to add another layer of the pre-moistened peat moss on top. And if I want to, and if I have room, I can add a second layer of tubers on top of that. And then I will seal my box up, but I will not close it up fully because I want to make sure that everything in here can breathe. So then I would seal up my box, and I'm going to show you how I would do it. I would close it just like this, and you can see that there's a small gap right there. That way the tubers can still breathe. I store the tubers in my garage. I've done it for a number of years, and this process has worked for me. My garage does not freeze during the winter months. It goes down as low as about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And the key is, no matter where you put your tubers, you want to make sure they're in a place where they're not going to freeze, but also you want to put them in a place where it's not too warm. Because if it's too warm, then it's going to cause the tubers to wake up prematurely and they're going to start sprouting. And you don't want that to happen. I'm going to be putting on my phone to check on my tubers once a month. The reason I'm doing that is I want to make sure that there is no rot in there. If I do find tubers that are rotten, I want to remove those immediately. The second reason I'm checking the box once a month is to make sure that the tubers are not too dry. And the way I know that is I check the peat moss. And if the peat moss is starting to feel extremely dry, it's getting dusty, then I just take a spray bottle and I spritz that top layer of peat moss. That's all I do. Even if I have 2 layers of tubers in here, it's okay. I'm just trying to add a little bit of humidity into this box. So I just spritz that top layer of peat moss with water, and then I just close the box back up and it goes back in my garage. This winter, I'll be sure to bring you along and I'll show you my process for checking on the tubers. And that will alert you that you should be doing the same thing. If you have to lift and winterize your dahlia tubers, I'd love to hear from you. I want to know, where do you store your tubers? Do you store them in the basement or the garage or somewhere else? And how do you package them up? Do you put them in a box like this? Do you put them in peat moss? It's great for you to be able to share with me, as well as anyone else that's reading the comments, the process that works for you and also where you live, because other people might get inspired and get ideas, because maybe there's someone out there that has had a very hard time overwintering dahlia tubers. And well, I don't want them to give up. I want to give them other options to try. So this is the option that works for me, but what's the option that works for you? And then later this winter, I'll show you my process for basically waking up the tubers. And I'll also show you how I divide the tubers. What I'll do is I'll also put previous videos down in the description below, because I did make videos last year showing you my process. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.